Hello and welcome to this week's News Desk. This is Season 4, Episode 39, and we're recording on Wednesday, October the 12th. We thought we'd wait a couple of days until after the other two friendly soccer and football games took place in Europe, which they have done on a Tuesday evening, so that my friend Nancy Gillen and I can talk about those. But we won't start there, will we not, Nancy? Because we talked about it so much before we hit record, and there's a lot of other news to get through this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, yes, another really busy week for women's sport. I think definitely the friendly matches, even though they were friendlies, were a bit of a highlight. But yeah, a lot of other stuff to get into as well.
And that includes rugby, and it includes skiing, and it includes motor racing, as well as some basketball and cycling. So I think we want to start, though, with what I picked, Nancy, to be the top story this week, because the friendlies were the friendlies. They were just that, right? So we'll talk about those plenty in just a few moments. But the story I picked was Kenya's Ruth Chepngetich. I think that's her name. She achieved the second fastest time, Nancy, in women's marathon history when she won the Chicago Marathon this past weekend in 2 hours, 14 minutes and 18 seconds. And I know we've had this, the marathon season, isn't it? We've had the London Marathon, but this was the Chicago Marathon. And that was really, really, really impressive. But I never failed to surprise, it doesn't surprise me, but it never fails to impress me how these African runners can just keep breaking records.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. I think, yeah, Ruth Chepngetich, missing out on the world record by just 14 seconds. I think we were saying that's such a marginal gain for, her future marathons. It's something like 0.5 seconds per mile to kind of increase on. So she did come so close to that world record. And yeah, it is always complete dominance in marathons from Ethiopian and Kenyan runners. So yeah, I think just she's continuing on that trend, and potentially may even beat the world record set by Bridget Kosgei, her compatriot, which was set in. Actually, I'm not sure when that's set. I think that was set relatively recently, wasn't it? So it could fall again quite soon.
Wasn't it in Tokyo?
I think it was. Yeah, I think you're right. So obviously that was pretty recently. So it could easily fall again soon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that I thought was a terrific story, and kudos to her, because there's so much happening in other sports that these runners tend to get overlooked in a way, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially in marathon season as well, I think the thing about marathons, because it's like mass participation event, there's a lot going on and there's loads of other people running it, and sometimes you focus on just the kind of normal person that runs it, and can overshadow sometimes that elite athletes that are also, when you look at the times they're running it in, it's just absolutely crazy. So yeah, I think they definitely deserve some attention.
They certainly do. Well, as I said, it is the marathon season in the fall, and we drove past the London Marathon, didn't we, Nancy, with the excitement of these friendly games that played out this past couple of weeks. With that, the London Marathon took place. You did not participate in it this year, but was there any takeaways from that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to watch it again, having run it last year, and to actually, I think, understand what people were, actually have that real life experience of doing it. So I watched, kind of tuned in for the end of the women's and the men's race. So yeah, the Ethiopian runner Yahola won the women's race, and it was, she actually tripped on a speed bump with 6 miles to go, but managed to pick herself back up and overtake everyone that had kind of gone ahead of her, and then win it in 2 hours 17. So not as quick as the Chicago Marathon, but still, it's still very impressive. So yeah, well done to her. And yeah, it was kind of weird just watching the whole event on TV, having been part of it last year.
I'd imagine you have a different perspective now, having run it yourself.
I mean, yeah, definitely. And a lot of respect, I suppose, for the people running it, and especially the elite athletes, because I think sometimes the time can just look, you don't have any real kind of understanding of what it takes to run a marathon 2 hours, 17 minutes and how absolutely ridiculous that really is. So I think when you do it yourself, you realise, I mean, it's a massive achievement for anyone, no matter what time they run it in. But yeah, I think when you do it yourself and you realise just how quick the elite athletes are going, it's, it does really make that kind of even more impressive.
What was your time?
I think I did it in 4.5. Yeah, it was 4.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, these athletes literally running it in under half the time that I could run it. So
it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it really is.
Put it in context. You know, this was your first ever marathon. You know, really last minute decision to run and to give it a go the way you did. I mean, that's extraordinary. But it does put it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And yeah, I was buzzing with my time. I was, in no way, I was very happy with it. But yeah, it just shows out, it was a time I was happy with. But there's people literally running it in more than half is, absolutely crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, a great experience. Well, congratulations to both of those winners, and particularly to Ruth there winning that Chicago Marathon and almost breaking a record. And I think we should keep an eye on her, Nancy. Even if we can't pronounce her last name, we'll keep an eye on Ruth and see what she does next. Right, we're going to move on to those 2 friendlies we talked about. Well, 4 friendlies as it happened, because the US and England both played 2 friendlies in this past 2 weeks in this international window. The US played England, and then they played Spain yesterday, and England played, obviously, the US, and then they went on to play Czechoslovakia in Brighton last night, Nancy. I don't know where to begin with these, because we have to put them in the context of the wider context where the US are concerned with what was happening off the field of play.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it all kind of came out, I think it was on the Monday before the England-US match on the Friday. And yeah, so I think it was sometime last year where these allegations of abuse in the NWSL started coming out, and then the NWSL subsequently commissioned an independent report carried out by Sally Yates. And so the results from that independent report were released. Yeah, I think it was 5 days before the match. And yeah, pretty horrific reading. I imagine most people have seen it now, but if you haven't, it's hard reading, but there are quite good summaries as well, where you can still get the gravity of it, but don't have to read all the details. But yeah, just systemic abuse, sexual and emotional abuse in the NWSL among a variety of teams and coaches. And I think the thing that was found was that a lot of people knew about it, or it was reported to a lot of people, like officials, people within the NWSL, people within clubs, and not much was really done. So it's kind of just allowed to continue. So the US players were obviously, I think Becky Sauerbrunn, the captain, she in a press conference, she kind of explained how they were all feeling. And it was, a lot of emotions like anger, heartbreak, sadness, really kind of negative emotions. So certainly I think that report and its findings definitely kind of overshadowed the match slightly. There was a show of solidarity. So both teams held up a sign saying protect our players. And I think both teams, definitely England and I presume the US as well, wore armbands, teal armbands.
Yes, they all did, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was a good show of solidarity, but yeah, I think it's hard to disagree that that report wouldn't have been on the minds of the US squad as they were over in Europe playing those 2 friendlies.
No, I think it was particularly hard for them, and and that they were away from home as well when all this was playing out, and the fact that, since the Olympics, and they came undone at the Olympics, and there's been dissatisfaction with their coach, Vlatko Andonovski, and the way that he's, picked the team apart after, they won the World Cup, and the kind of team that we had then is very different to what we have now. And of course, they have to try new players. They have to try new things, of course. And we've had a lot of players that have been left off the roster through injuries now. I was just looking at that list, or put a list together myself the other day. It's Kristen Press, Alex Morgan, Mal Pugh, Sam Mewis, Abby Del Campo, Julie Hertz, Katarina Macario, Lynn Williams, Tiana Davidson, Tobin Heath, Kelly O'Hara, and Emily Sonnet. Now, all those names are well known internationally, but imagine if they had that team that they had at the 2019 World Cup, Nancy. What a different team that would have, what a different game that would have been against the England to start off with. And the way Serena has built that team, I think that would have been especially on fresh legs, that would have been a real ding-dong of a game. But it's not. It's a totally different team that we've got now, and totally different team that played those two friendlies and literally came undone. It's like the knitting's just completely come undone with the US team.
And I think, to a degree, I think the US they were always the team to beat, I suppose. And I don't know what to expect with the US because they haven't really played European opposition in a while. And there was definitely a lot of new players I hadn't watched that much. So I wasn't sure kind of what to expect. But I think even the fact that England won, and it was relatively, I don't think in future occasions England would certainly go into the match feeling completely intimidated and overawed by the US team, especially having got that victory. I still think it will in future occasions in the months to come and potentially at the World Cup still be very equally matched and hard fought. But I just think maybe that fear factor that the US had, that they were the best in the world and they kind of win every game. I think the two friendlies definitely went some way to, the England loss and the Spain loss definitely went some way to reduce that.
Because we have a completely different team now. So that reputation is a reputation of yesterday. It's not the current. It doesn't belong to the team that we have, that he put out there for those friendlies, or since the Olympics, since he took over, and since the Olympics. But I think at the same time, for the deficit that the US clearly has now, what we must not lose sight of, Nancy, is that over these past few years, the European teams right across the board have gotten that much better.
Yeah, and that's it. I think it's not, it's not to say the US have just got loads worse. It's also because, you look at England and the 2019 World Cup, it was 2-1 to the US in the semi-final, but in all honesty, we had a manager who had absolutely no idea what he was doing and wasn't using the team adequately. And we've seen what's happened when the FA have actually been like, right, who's actually going to win us trophies, and let's spend some money and actually get someone in that knows their stuff. And you've seen the way Sarina Wiegman has completely transformed the Lionesses. It's the same pool of players. There's no one really that new in that pool of players. Maybe some of the younger players like Lauren Hemp and Ella Toon, but no one massively major. But she's just completely transformed them into a winning squad. So it's you just kind of seen that happen more across Europe. I think federations actually want to take women's football seriously and so contribute to that. So yeah, I think you kind of seen the two, England and US, got kind of just at very opposite places at the moment. I think maybe a lot of US fans would argue that the current US manager maybe also doesn't know what he's doing and can't really get the most out of his squad.
It's a bit like if you put Serena Wiegman and Vlatko on a seesaw in a child's playground.
Yeah.
I have so much respect for that woman and the way she's built that team. And on the other end of the seesaw, I mean, he has just dropped them down to the ground, and he's got to completely rebuild, but he's got to look back at those veterans, because we had that conversation, Nancy. Do you remember about how much talent we have, We have the talent. We have young talent. You saw the Trinity Rodmans and the Sophia Smiths running around out there. We've got the talent, but we can't discard all the veterans at once.
Well, yeah, and it's just the structure of the team, isn't it? And I think if the experience in the team, I think if you shake things up too much, and certainly there should be change, but yeah, if you shake things up too much, then it's just everything's quite disjointed and no one's 100% sure what they're doing, and so on. So yeah, it's at the moment, the US do seem to be a little lost.
Well, the game against England, it was their lowest possession since 2016. It was a 31.3%. And I don't have these stats in my head, Nancy. I did write these down. 67.7% passing accuracy. That was the third lowest in Vlatko's tenure. 2 shots on target. 2 shots. That's the lowest in his tenure. And 58.3% passing accuracy in the opposition's half.
Yeah.
And like I said to you before I sent you this text, that I thought, the current team is like a polo mint. There's nothing in the centre, in the midfield. Completely undone the knitting, and there's nobody in the centre there to support these young players who will go forward. The likes of Rodman and Sophia Smith. There's nobody there. They're just come undone, and they just need to solve that. But in the meantime, like I said, I think we have to not lose sight of the fact that the European teams have really, really built up and caught up and overtaken the Americans now, as they've come way down on that seesaw. But what was noticeable, of course, the Spanish team that they played yesterday evening, that was a team that's completely become undone with their political problems, their team problems. They've lost 15 of their main players, and they could still beat the US 2-0. So that says it all, really, doesn't it? That really says it all.
Yeah, and I think that's why when I saw the score, I was what I was most surprised at, because I think a full strength Spain team, I don't think I'd be that surprised at a 2-0 scoreline. But yeah, I think it's the fact that it was kind of a second-rate Spanish team. They had to get, give a lot of debuts to players and get some of their younger players in. So, and kind of, similarly, like you said, they've also got something hanging over them a bit. So yeah, I was surprised by that scoreline. I really was. I thought the US would win that. So yeah, I think obviously a lot to think about when they on the flight back to the US.
Definitely, but all credit to Spain being able to pull it together and pull that kind of team together, and win and play well and be the better team on the night. And again, kudos to England as well and to Serena and building that team to be as solid as it was and the better team on the night. I mean, I think I said to you before, not only are they the informed team, because obviously they've just won the Euros, but the way that they played, they're so solid in their play right now. But I was still, I think, and we said before, and because I know you wanted England to win. I wanted it to be a draw because they're both good teams. This is a friendly, and it almost was a draw.
Yeah, and it was a very controversial match, wasn't it? Well, not controversial, but eventful.
Very eventful.
Penalties, a lot of VAR was heavily involved and stuff. So
yeah, they were kicking each other about. These girls were kicking each other about on the field.
Yeah, it's intensifying the rivalry. I enjoyed it for that. I thought it was a good match between two big rivals. So yeah.
And the fact that last night you played Czechoslovakia and couldn't get a goal past them, I thought that was noteworthy. But we discussed this too off air, that there's a lot of tired legs, a long season, a major championship, the Euros, and they hardly caught their breath, and they go back to their clubs, and then they have to come out again for these international friendlies. And then in November, they've got both England and the US have got more friends. We're playing Germany twice in November, Nancy. So I wouldn't make any predictions based on the teams that played in Europe. But it's a tiring season for them.
Yeah, and I do think it's there are these set international windows, but it does seem crazy that you have a Euros and then you have like going straight into the league. I know a lot of the Man City players, I think they literally had 1 week's break after the Euros, and then straight into the league, and then World Cup qualifying, and then back to the league, and then international break again. Their schedules are absolutely crammed with matches, and I do think there is an element of players being tired and stuff. So hopefully that then doesn't translate into injury.
Yeah, I hope so too. And we've got far too many. We've got 3, 6, 9. We've got 12 off. Of our top players that are injured. That's a lot, Nancy. So hopefully it'll all look different in the new year. But before we move on from football, there's just one story that I picked up which turned out to be fake news, and it involves the England coach Sarina Wiegman. Her contract is to 2025, and she says she's happy with the length of that deal, Nancy. But there was a bit of fake news about it being extended to 2027. So I would say that the way England are playing, they should keep her forever. She's not allowed to go anywhere else.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are very happy with this news article that she extended to 2027. But yeah, unfortunately, it ended up not being true. But 2025, that's still a significant period of time. And hopefully if she keeps winning, she's going to renew at some point. So yeah, she seems to be very happy with where she is, which is what we want.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, and who are you playing, did you say, in your friendlies in November?
So Norway and Japan. So some interesting games there.
Yeah, and we're playing Germany twice. So, all right, more of that, of course, on future episodes. But we want to move on now to the rest of this week's news. We're going to go to rugby, Nancy, because it is the World Cup currently underway, started on October the 8th in New Zealand with the group stages. And the biggest result, of course, if anybody supports England and the Red Roses, was that they scored 14 tries in their first game against Fiji, beating them 84-19. That was a thorough statement, that was, and they know they're favourites going into the tournament, but that was pretty convincing, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think I think, I know Fiji are maybe not the toughest opposition, no disrespect to them, but I think quite a message out to their opponents. I think, the time difference is making it a bit difficult to watch any full matches, but I also caught the highlights of Wales-Scotland, and Wales scoring a conversion kick in the very last minute of the game to win 18-15. I thought that was also really entertaining. So that was probably, for me, the match of the first round of group stage matches.
All right. Well, a lot more rugby to come. They go right through to November the 22nd. So there's more group games this week and into the weekend. So we'll have more of that for you next week. And also coming up very quickly, Nancy, we're not even halfway through October, and it is that time to start thinking about the Skiing World Cup, which the season begins on October 22nd in Solden in Austria, as always, with that Giant Slalom. I don't know, I just get excited when that comes around again. It just seems such a long time waiting for it, and then it gets underway. And we've got, I think, 21 venues this coming season. So yeah, we'll have a lot more skiing news for you as that unfolds. And as I said, it begins on October 22nd in Solden, Austria, with that giant slalom. So stay tuned for more of that. Now, Nancy, last week we talked about the W Series. Every week we seem to talk about the W Series, the motor racing season. And we knew that there was going to be a threat to it. There were 3 races left in this season. And just this week, it was announced that the season is actually going to end abruptly due to lack of funding. This is a huge shame, Nancy. I don't know if they can regroup and find the funding for next year, but what's the story behind that?
Yeah, so like you said, I think these financial difficulties have kind of been in the air for some time. It seems to be that there was a company who had pledged to kind of invest the required amount of money, but then this kind of fell through and the payment didn't reach W Series. And then essentially the chief executive, Catherine Bonne-Muir, I think decided that in the long run, it's better to call off the end of the season now and then hopefully be able to regroup and have the funds to have an event next season instead of completely running the competition into the ground this season and then not being able to have a competition next season at all. So yeah, it sounded quite tricky for her. She said she's kind of hardly been sleeping, trying to speak to investors in the UK and the US, but it just kind of didn't really come through. And that, yeah, apparently the drivers as well were really gutted when they were told as well, because they just kind of want to race. If anyone's wondering what that means for the winner, it's Jamie Chadwick was given the title, her 3rd successive W Series title. I think you in like the rules of the competition or whatever, they need to have completed 6 races, and it's whoever's in front. As long as 6 races have been completed, which is why Chadwick was given the title, given she'd won the majority. So, yeah, obviously a bit of an anticlimax for her to kind of win off the back of the series being curtailed. But, yeah, I think there is also a bit of a sense of optimism that the W Series can continue in 2023. Bonne-Muir said she's extremely confident that it will return, but that they're just going to have to be quite prudent with the budget. So it's this year been latched onto the F1 races, which has taken it to places like Singapore and the US and places like that. But potentially maybe the W Series should maybe focus more on European races to lower the cost of that. European races are a bit more rare in F1. So I think they're probably going to have to work out that dynamic a little bit. But yeah, she said she's going to fight for W Series until I can't. So I think there's, someone really, really fighting their corner. And hopefully it seems like this decision is sensible in that they are looking at for, the long-term future and the sustainability of the competition. So I'm, just really hopeful that this might, spur someone on to invest in them or back them, and that next year they can go again.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Yeah, hopefully by drawing a line under the season now, it gives them more time, a longer runway to build up the funding for next season. Well, fingers crossed. And congratulations, Jamie, winning yet a 3rd title. And I know there's a lot more in that woman's future, that's for sure. Well, we're going to stay with wheels right now because we've got a cycling story. The French champion Pauline Ferrand-Prevot has been signed as the first female rider to sign with Ineos Grenadiers. Nancy, you found this story on BBC Sport. That's a big deal, isn't it? Ferrand-Prevot has already 8 mountain bike world titles, so they're the team to be with.
Yeah, so there's already quite a few cycling teams, Trek Segafredo and Jumbo Visma, that have men and women's squads. So yeah, Ineos Grenadiers have decided that they're also going to bring in a female rider as well. Really, really successful. Pauline Ferrand-Prevot is a really successful cyclist. So I think the idea is she's French, and that the Olympics in Paris 2024, it's a big move for her to sign on with this team and potentially win gold in maybe the road race at the Olympic Games, which I imagine would be pretty amazing for her. So yeah, and Ineos, I don't know that much about cycling, but I know they are one of the biggest cycling teams in terms of men's cycling. So yeah, they've been on the Cycling World Tour since 2010 and have 7 Tour de France wins among their team. So yeah, a pretty big deal. So yeah, that's a really good news for women's cycling.
All right. Yeah, for sure, because that means she's 30 years old now. She's going to diversify from their roots in road cycling. But the team, as you said, has got a tremendous record: 8 mountain bike world titles, as well as road, cyclocross, and gravel world titles. I think I ought to join their gravel team. That's that's where I enjoy my cycling on gravel. But yeah, good for her, and good for women in sport. Maybe there'll be more women join teams in cycling. All right. Well, that's thanks for picking up that story, Nancy. It's always good to hear, a first. Well, we're going to finish now with basketball because, Nancy, you know the story of Brittney Griner, the WNBA star, who's been detained in Russia now since February. She's going to be returning to the court on October 25th for an appeal hearing. And her wife, Cherelle, said that once the hearing is held and the order is finalized, Brittney could be moved to a labor camp. And she added that President Biden is doing all he can, but there's another party in the situation. And they're also dealing with the need for Russia to have mercy on Brittney. And then I did read, Nancy, subsequently to that, that there has been an unofficial intermediary who has been going to Russia to talk to the American hostages. There's Paul Whelan as well as part of the deal that they're trying to get both of these hostages out and do an exchange. But he's nothing to do with the U.S. government. It's very much an unofficial capacity. But he tried to get a sense of where they are and what the prospects might be. And he feels that they could be out by the end of the year. But I think the U.S. government would rather him, just keep rather low key and not make these kind of statements, because obviously there's official channels that they're going through to negotiate the release of both Brittney and Paul Whelan. But it's really hard to have hope, isn't it? But then when you think of, October 25th, if she fails the appeal, she could end up in a labor camp. It's pretty scary stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is really scary. It's terrifying, and it's been kind of going on for so long. She's been in that situation for such a long time now that I just hope that it can come to a conclusion soon. But yeah, it is very scary.
Yeah, how demoralizing it really must be for her and for everyone involved, and her wife, her family. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, and we'll bring you any updates as we hear them here on the show. I think that's about it for this week, isn't it, Nancy?
I think it is, yeah. I think we covered nearly every single sport in that roundup, so good variety.
Good variety. And what will you be covering now? Because now the international friendlies are over, all the girls are going back to their clubs. What's coming up for Arsenal for your team?
Yeah, so we've got WSL coming back this weekend. Arsenal have got Reading, which should hypothetically be quite a straightforward game because Reading haven't won a game yet, but we'll have to see. We've also got quite a big boxing fight over here, Claressa Shields versus Savannah Marshall, which is rescheduled.
Oh, yes. Rescheduled, yeah.
Yeah, so that will be on Saturday at the O2 Arena, so that should be good as well. And yeah, that's kind of the two main events happening this week.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll be back next week with more news from around the world of women's sports. But until then, don't forget to follow us on social media at WISPorts and check out the show notes online at wisports.com. And Nancy, remind everybody how they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm at Nancy_Gillen on Twitter and Nancy Gillen_sport on Instagram. And then, I write for Gimme Sport Women, and our Twitter handle is Gimme Sport W.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks, Nancy, as always.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to speak about women's sport and in such depth, as always.
As always. All right. Well, we'll be back next week. Until then, enjoy your sport, and thank you for listening.